Hello everyone, I hope you guys are all doing well. It's been a while since my last video, but alas, here we are again talking about another anime film that's well loved and appreciated by those who have seen it. Riz to Aoi Tori, or Liz and the Bluebird. Liz and the Bluebird is an anime coming-of-age drama film released in 2018 by Kyoto Animation, which is a spin-off film of the series Sound Euphonium, which focuses on the relationship between two third-year students, Nozomi Kasaki and Mizore Yoroisuke. While the film presents unique visuals and art styles to Sound Euphonium, I can guarantee you that this is something to recommend because of its unique qualities and contributions to the franchise, touching upon many challenges that we all face while growing up, such as the importance of friendship, understanding each other, and having the courage to move on for the sake of our own potential and of those who we care for. Liz and the Bluebird is directed by none other than the famed Naoko Yamada, known for directing some of Kyoto Animation's popular works such as The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, Clannad, K-On!, and the film I just covered in our last video, Koe no Katachi. What makes Yamada's style unique is her emphasis on characters' expressions, not only through dialogue, but through body language, immersive music, and the natural environment in order to captivate the audience's feelings, and to create a really intimate relationship between film and the viewer. As mentioned in my Koe video, Yamada uses quick close-ups of characters' faces, arms, legs, and feet to key in the viewer towards what the character is feeling visually, rather than having the characters reveal all of their emotions through dialogue. From the opening shot of the film, it becomes apparent that Liz is a visual narrative. From the opening shot in the real-life narrative depicting Mizore waiting lonesomely on the steps of the high school for Nozomi, the film goes on an entire 2 minutes and 10 seconds before the first word is even spoken by either girl. Yamada uses shots of faces and extremities to depict the emotions of Mizore in that moment, capturing the moment she perks up upon Nozomi's arrival. There are many instances in the film where silence accompanies intimate shots and angles, as the viewer is able to recognize the internal conflicts and thoughts the girls are processing, without any internal dialogue present in the film's entire hour 30 runtime. Yamada's genius directing techniques are ever so prominent in Liz, as its intimacy is apparent in her use of dialogue, or in this case, lack thereof, and her lifelike orchestration of body language and visual emotions. The art style in Liz, as I previously mentioned, is different from the original Sound Euphonium series. Futoshi Nishiya, who is known for his elegantly expressive and emotional character designs in works like Hyoka, Koe no Katachi, and animation directing in works like The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, K-On!, and Clannad, breathes new life into the designs of the Kitauji High School bandmates. You will also notice that the characters in this film have smaller eyes and longer necks, and this will ever be more apparent when comparing Liz and the Bluebird to Sound Euphonium. Despite what seems to be a dramatic change from its original art style, I think emphasizing on changing the characters' proportions is key in determining how the audience will react when watching the film. The eyes of the characters are toned down to more realistic proportions that enable Yamada to work with more human-like expressivism than what would have been possible with the original series designs that had more moe and exaggerated characteristics. Details like strands of hair and facial nuances are drawn more thoughtfully to better assist Yamada in her visual storytelling. The new designs assist in the film's ability to tell a story without even relying on very much dialogue. Moving on to the color palette, it is seen that it isn't very much like Sound Euphonium, where the colors in Liz are much more mellow. Because of this, it gives a more dreamlike appearance, and it fits well with the nature of the film. In the film, there's a strong focus towards light blue and grayish colors that further distinguishes it from the TV anime. In Sound Euphonium, the colors are much more bolder, vibrant, characteristic, of the eye-catching, distinctly anime and moe visuals that accompany many of Kyoto Animation's works. By mellowing out the colors used in the film, however, Yamada depicts the grays and blues that better reflect the real world as we know it. This contrast in style, which can best be classified as more indicative of real life, further draws the viewer into a film that feels much more intimate and relatable. Life as we know it isn't typically an array of bright pastels or a chromatic spectrum of colors. Instead, what plays out before the viewer is the coming of age of the girls. The world Yamada paints is mellow and gentle, like the demeanor of young Mizore as she navigates her future. The colors speak as softly to the viewer as the shy and unassuming girl on screen. In contrast, the scenes that feature parts of the storybook's narrative are in a watercolor art style. These scenes alone show a very relaxed, fantasy-like, and even nostalgic feeling, like a beautiful painting. The colors in the fairy tale are bright and eye-catching, appropriately reflecting illustrations befitting of a children's storybook. As the film weaves in and out of each narrative, the viewer is greeted with engaging visual contrasts between worlds that are connected instead through their symbolic and thematic parallels. As with many of Yamada's works, it is seen that flowers are one of the featured motifs in Liz. For Yamada, flowers are expressed as a second language used to represent characters' personalities and feelings through imagery instead of words. For example, in Koe no Katachi, it was seen that flowers represented the feelings of the various scenes they were implemented in, which is something that is also seen in Liz and the Bluebird. In Liz, however, the way flowers are used are much more clever. While the film's focus on Mizore and Nozomi's relationship being united through music is something that's much more prevalent, flowers provide a potent secondary meaning. All of the scenes containing flowers have important symbolic meaning between the characters of the film and interpretations of the flowers themselves. For this section, I will refer to Atelier Emily's WordPress article titled "The Flower Language of Liz and the Bluebird" that describes the flower language in Liz. The article goes into depth about the flowers in the film well, however, I will only briefly explain the most vital highlights, such as the ones that describe the characters' emotions and feelings the strongest. The movie starts off with this shot, which frames a sunrise over a lake, and we are already greeted with many flowers in the field between birch trees. In this shot, you can see some looping flowers in the bottom left, which they are said to represent happiness and imagination. This is very representative of the emotion of the scene, considering that its watercolor art style is very moody and dreamy, in return provoking a fantastical and imaginative feeling. On the bottom right, you will also see some round pink flowers that resemble pink cosmos, which are said to mean deep, lasting love, a symbol of Mizore and Nozomi's relationship. In Japanese flower language, pink cosmos represent a maiden's heart, which would be also very good symbolism for Liz herself, who is seen as a lonely, beautiful maiden in the forest. In another shot at the beginning of the film, a lily of the valley appears on the bottom right. Known for being poisonous, the lily of the valley carries similar meanings of a white lily. These include purity, chastity, and sweetness, which fits the nature of Liz, who is seen tending to her animals in the forest. This helps establish Liz as a very sweet person whose presence is received by the audience as someone who's caring and heartwarming. The blue flowers with yellow centers in this shot, known as forget-me-nots, are the ones that are most prominent in this scene, in both visual framing and symbolic importance. Much like the name suggests, it is said that the forget-me-nots represent true love and remembrance, which is important and vital to realizing how much Mizore and Nozomi care for each other, despite their feelings not being expressed directly through dialogue throughout the film. The darker blue flowers in this shot can also be identified as blue anemones. which also represent remembrance, but can also be interpreted as a wish for a good future. Its importance is outlined again by how the characters mean a lot towards each other, especially with the ending befitting for a blessed future for both Mizore and Nozomi. Not only do these specific flowers represent Mizore and Nozomi's feelings, these flowers do coincide well with the bluebird's appearance, considering the color of the flowers to not only be similar to her, but to also how the bluebird's legacy was known to be unforgettable after she is uncaged later on in the film. Probably the most important flower that this film shows is the small white flower with 3 petals. This flower appears right when Mizore and Nozomi realize who are the real parallels to the storybook characters, and I believe this is very genius on behalf of the director, because it's probably the most meaningful to the characters themselves. According to the article, the flower most likely represents a spiderwort, which is said to represent someone holding another in a very high regard, admiring them greatly. As seen with Liz's admiration and love for the bluebird, this flower could also be said to play the same role for both Nozomi and Mizore. Nozomi being the one who held Mizore back the whole time, out of her admiration and love for Mizore, decides to set her free. The two parallel narratives in Liz are dignified equally as musically as they are visually. While the dreamlike fairy tale of the picture book story is paired with expressions of the titular ensemble piece, the narrative between Mizore and Nozomi sees the return of composer Kensuke Ushio in his second installment in Naoko Yamada's legacy. If you've seen my Koe no Katachi video, you may recall that I touched upon the craftiness of Ushio's invention. As more than just a composer, Ushio manipulates sound and percussive ideas in order to create melody that is rounded out with ambience, providing atmosphere and intimacy. As the producer animations lift and the film begins, the opening piece When the Glass Bluebirds begins, as silently and shyly as the meek Mizore on screen. Sound and notes flutter in and out of focus as the lone girl waits, soft strokes on the soundscape that Ushio is painting. With the vibrant entrance of the bobbing and upbeat Nozomi comes the rhythm of footsteps and the second layer to the musical idea. With the introduction of the greatest light in Mizore's life on screen, sparks too the melody of the opening piece. Listening to the piece independent from the film reveals that in this opening sequence, the soundtrack and sound design in this moment are one and the same. The sound of Nozomi's rhythmic walking, the birds chirping, and the sounds of Kitaoji High School are all part of the track itself. As each new layer and lyrical voice is introduced, Ushio fills out the gaps with the ambience of the trivial slice of life. What results more than anything is an immersiveness of sound that could more appropriately be described as ambient atmosphere more than music. In many of his pieces throughout the film, Ushio builds his pieces through compounding layers of sounds and idea, but when he introduces more conventional tracks, such as the character theme of Ririka Kenzaki, the freshman oboist, he plays on variations of the same idea to match the mood of the scene. Double Red Girls 1, along with many of its variations, mimics the upbeat quirkiness of Ririka through what is best described as a whimsical oboe arrangement. In moments of her vulnerability, like when she fails to make the audition, we get the same melody in a much more subdued and melancholy arrangement in Double Red Girls 4. Other tracks like Secret Love Steps fill the gaps of the silent contemplative moments of the girls as they consider their own futures and reflect on how much the other means to them. Scenes from the storybook, rather than being paired with Ushio's work, are accompanied exclusively with excerpts from the titular composition. Appropriately, each movement of the piece represents a different moment in the relationship between Liz and the Blue Bird, mirroring the joys of friendships, the turbulence of adversity, the heartbreaking realization of caged potential, and the bittersweet moment of letting go. It is believed by some that this film serves as just another sound euphonium film that fills in a gap between seasons. That is a thought, however, that shouldn't be taken seriously. Liz and the Bluebird is a film that features some of the biggest themes and experiences during the teenage coming-of-age period, which includes finding trust in others, figuring out friendships, and understanding feelings with others. These feelings are portrayed throughout visual and auditory cues by both the way the film is directed and how it tries to immerse you into the characters' worlds. Understanding what is behind the minds of both Mizore and Nozomi is what Yamada wants you to feel, because it is most likely something you have experienced in your own life. This film alone shows how important understanding ourselves is, and how being truthful and honest with each other is what makes a friendship strong. Looking into its deeper meaning and seeing the development of the characters' relationships in this film, it poses great importance to the viewer, because finding trust in one another and expressing honest feelings to someone close is something that we all value. As we all grow older, we develop new thoughts and experiment with concepts that are unfamiliar to us. We make our way into adulthood, learning to let go of our codependencies and insecurities on our path towards improving ourselves and making the most of our potential. We look back on those we have cared for and those who have cared for us, to realize where we have been and where we are going. Liz and the Bluebird is a visually appealing film featuring clever sound design and smart directing that conveys intimacy through thorough expressism and humanity. I think its quiet and peaceful tone was made to reflect the subtle coming of age of the girls on screen, and the pacing was just right when you consider how the development between Mizore and Nozomi played out. The way the film draws you in just felt right to me. The mellow colors and quiet visual storytelling delicately displays the girls' internal struggles and codependencies, while the vibrancy of the fairy tale narrative parallels the conflict with greater fantastical grandeur. One of the biggest things I enjoyed from the film was how much it had immersed me. The film had you trying to relate to the characters, almost like you were there. Although Liz isn't KyoAni's most well-recognized film, especially when compared to Koe no Katachi or K-On! The Movie, it still holds the admired core values that the studio has worked with for decades, and the quality and care put into this film fits the bill of an unassuming Kyoto Animation masterpiece. Learning to move on and to let go of our dependencies at critical crossroads in our lives is something that Liz and the Bluebird teaches us with grace and humility. While sharing in our moments of closeness and syncrasies, our quaint instances of connections and happy ice creams, we realize that where we once were disjoint and unable to grasp our budding potentials, we are now joined in our mutual support of our unique diverging pathways in life. We learn to let go, but not at the expense of our compassion for one another. We learn to release the caged bluebird within our hearts and encourage it to spread its azure wings in the greater world, now at its oyster. And most importantly of all, we recognize what motivates us to do such things for those who we care so deeply for, simply put, is our love for one another.